The next panel discusses on how to build a global startup for massive growth. Let me now introduce, it's moderated by Barrett Parkman from GWC. Come on, you can do better than that. Ryosuke Kawamura, CEO of BitSeller. Doug Rennert, partner, Tandem Capital. Danny Virianto, founder of MindTalk. And Eric Seton, the CTO of Tango.
Welcome, everyone. You guys awake? Yeah? All right. So a couple different things before we get started is that we will have one Japanese speaker on this panel, so you do need a translation device. So grab one. There should be one close to you if you don't have one already. Additionally, I will try my best to take questions from Twitter at the end of the session. So prepare your questions and tweet them. Make sure you include the hashtag the GMIC. All right, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to have everyone just give a quick 30-second or so introduction, just introduce everyone to the panel, to the audience. So let's start down at the other end with Danny.
All right, thanks, Barrett. My name is Danny Virianto, came from mindtalk.com, and it's basically a social group based on interests that we're supposed to be replacing mailing list group and also like a forum. And I also run the largest publisher sites in Indonesia. We cover about 95% of the market.
Hi, I'm Eric Seton, co-founder and CTO of Tango. Tango is a chat service that is free on iOS, Android, and Windows Phone 7. We're well known for our video chat communication service that is one of the best in the world. It covers thousands of devices. But Tango also allows its members to send text messages, pictures, videos, and also play games together. We've got 70 million users in 212 countries. And as a company, raised close to $100 million. We're based in Palo Alto, California. We've got about 100 people. We've got a small R&D office in Beijing, China. We're also hiring in engineering, marketing, and product. So if you're interested, you can come and see me after the panel.
Hi, I'm Doug Rennert. I'm a partner at Tandem Capital. We're a mobile startup accelerator and seed fund. We invest in 3 mobile startups every quarter. We put in $200,000 and 6 months of hands-on support. Our deadline for kind of the next group of Tandem-backed companies is January 2nd. So we're about to bring in our next class, and then we'll decide on the one after that, after January 2nd. Just a couple of examples of kind of, quote, global businesses that we've helped build. We actually just invested exactly 1 year ago in a company called BitRhymes. Their game, Bingo Bash, has become a top 5 grossing iPad app in about 40 countries. They've gone from 0 to $50 million in revenue in 12 months. So it's been a very fast ride and a global ride. One other company, very different, that we started about 3 years ago is called Playhaven. They're actually a platform for mobile developers. They've got thousands of developers using their product, again, around the world, but have had a very different kind of growth path. So I'll look forward to talking about some of these examples as we get into the panel.
Great.
Are you ready to prepare your headset for translation? こんにちは、ビットセラーの川村と申します。我々はですね、FX カメラという、カメラアプリケーションを、開発をしています。で、ユーザーがですね、今、世界中に225カ国に、2000万人いまして、Android では、世界で一番大きいカメラアプリケーションの、一つになっています。で、Android だけで2000万人まで行ったんですけれども、来月 iOS バージョンの、FX カメラというのも、ローンチする予定ですので、今日ここにいらっしゃる皆さん iPhone のユーザーさんが多いと思うんですけれども、来月になったらぜひ利用してみてください。
Great, okay. So as you can see, we have a very diverse panel. We have many different geographies covered. And we also have advice from entrepreneurs as well as investors. So you entrepreneurs in the audience should really start to listen. I think we'll have some great advice on as to how you can grow internationally and grow globally. So, so let's kick off the first question is, in today's kind of app ecosystem, it is extremely easy and relatively cheap to go international, at least to some extent. There's some certain markets where it's not so, but overall, it's relatively cheap to go international. And at the same time, actually we see on each app store in each country, often the top apps are from other countries, not from that local country. So my question to the panel is, going international at this point as a mobile app or service, is it absolutely required or is it still optional? And I'm going to start here with Eric Sutton, who clearly has, I think you guys have users in 212 countries, so I might have an idea what your opinion is so far already, but let's see what you have to say.
I think that's a great way to kick off the panel. So I actually don't think that it's an option. I think it's absolutely required. And I'm particularly speaking about direct-to-consumer businesses that need to get to a large scale extremely quickly. I think that one of the mistakes that I see sometimes from companies that are just about to launch is there's a reluctance to launch internationally, and maybe you're going to restrict your app to only work in countries that you've checked, validated, etc., where all the language is perfect. And I think that in general, you want to architect and hack growth as much as you can. And so I think one of the first steps in making sure that you can have the biggest growth that you can is just to make sure that there are no boundaries, and so release everywhere. If you release in Japan, you will have 0 users in Japan, de facto. So you should not limit yourself, you should not feel shy about your product, and you should just launch it everywhere. I think that two other things that I want to speak about in order to kind of help you do that. Today there are a lot of visual paradigms that are probably better suited than text for showing particular applications. And I think that if you can avoid having too much text in your app and having buttons that are pictograms and that are clear and that use symbols that everybody uses, I think that it also makes your app a better app in general. But that just alleviates a lot of the burden of translation that a small company would have to do when they launch their first product, because I think it would be very difficult for your first product, your first launch, your first version to be localized in 20, 30 countries, etc. I think then as you go on, I think that then you can start focusing on these things. Number 3, I think that as a team, you need to be focused on international. And I think that happens particularly in companies that have founders from international backgrounds. At Tango, we're lucky that we're 2 founders from Israel and France, so we're expatriates ourselves here in the US. And in our company of about 100 people, we've got 18 nationalities, and so everybody knows basically what's the experience in their home country. Everybody kind of brings this experience. The fact that we have an office in Beijing also helps us figure out some of the gotchas. But I think that really, really helps when part of the team actually comes from abroad and can bring that perspective.
Great perspectives. Okay, let's get an investor perspective from Doug.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with particularly one comment Eric made, which is you should launch everywhere because getting data on what users are doing with your app or service is the most valuable thing you can have. I actually, with most of our companies, we don't tend to focus internationally from the beginning. We actually pick an initial market and say, let's, at least treat this as our initial audience, get as much information as we can, optimize for this group, but we'll launch everywhere and we'll see what happens. And we've been surprised almost every time in terms of places that apps have taken off and places where they haven't. I mean, one example I can think of is we had a company called Zumo Drive, which was kind of a precursor to iCloud, but it came out right when the iPhone was first launched, and it allowed you to sync your media across all these devices, which for the first time people were trying to figure out. And we built it in English, but it was really a utility, a synchronization utility. We launched it. The App Store really had just opened up. We didn't even know much about the App Store. but we put it everywhere. And US, which was our target market, was our #1 market, but we became the #1 free app in Japan for a while, even though it was only available in English. And we were very high in South Korea, probably not surprisingly, and in Northern Europe. And it turns out these were the places that were kind of the most forward-thinking, mobile users who were trying to consume lots of digital content on their devices. And even though we had just made the thing available in English, they were eating it up in these places. And that obviously caught our attention. We then ended up translating the product into, I think, 15 different languages and getting all these partnerships to help us distribute there, but that was after the fact. And once we had initial interest and kind of proof of that, we were able to get partnerships with Motorola and Lenovo and HP and other companies to basically subsidize some of that localization and then kind of accelerate our distribution there. So I wouldn't say it was accidental, but we definitely didn't say, hey, here are the markets we were going after before we had the data. We got the data, then we figured that out.
Right on. So I think we brought up a couple different good points. I think we'll come back to one in that it isn't all about marketing, it isn't all about strategy, it's also about your product, and there's different ways that you need to really customize your product to be able to grow internationally. We'll come back to that in a minute. But another point, so it sounded like Eric said launch everywhere. Was that a correct quote? And I think you said launch in target countries.
No, I actually like launching everywhere, but I don't like when you're building something trying to figure out every single market. I like the product guys trying to figure out one market, but hey, when you launch it, I don't think there's anything wrong with making it available in these other places.
So,
it does depend on the product, though. I mean, Tango is very different than if you're building OpenTable or something like that.
No doubt. So that's launch everywhere, but keep your target market in mind, okay, in the building of the product. Okay, Ruosuki?
FX カメラもですね、今225カ国で展開していまして、で、本当に基本的なことなのかもしれないんですけれども、Google プレイであったりとか、Apple の App Store っていうそのグローバルでのプラットフォームっていうのがすごく定着してきたので、明らかにその国際的にプロダクトを展開するっていうことがコストがほとんどかからず、非常に割安になってきている状況なので。やはり今後ここからプロダクトを展開していこうという場合には国際的にやっていくっていうのが過去に比べて割安なので必須の条件になってくるのかなというふうに考えています。特に我々もいろいろ日々いろんな数字を見ながら分析をしているんですけれども、FX カメラでいうと例えばこの1ヶ月間ものすごく人気が出たのがイタリアだったりとか、全く我々の想定を超えるようなことっていうのが実際にグローバルでプロダクトを展開している時に起こってくるので、本当にさっきエリックも言ってたと思うんですけれども、なるべく言語とかそういうものっていうのが関わらないようにプロダクトっていうのを世界中でローンチしていって、その後いろいろな数字の動きっていうのが実際に起こるので、そこからローカルにどんどんフォーカスしていくっていうようなことっていうのがモバイルアプリでグローバルにプロダクトを展開していくっていう時にすごく有効な広め方なんじゃないかなというふうに考えております。
Okay, great. So I think we have so far somewhat agreement among the panel. Let's see if Danny has a varying opinion.
I think it's like I see so many startups that actually like they have a different purpose sometimes. For example, there's some like actually startup that they focus on local region. I mean, maybe like when we talk about FX camera, we talk about Tango is a very universal tools, right? But sometimes we also like seeing like our friend that like actually build for a specific like let's say like for pregnant lady call or anything that like localized. And I think it's like again it depends on the startup. If some of you probably get lucky, get funded like millions of dollars, and some startup doesn't have that chance. And so what they do is they have to grow what they have. So sometimes it's local region in the mindset to conquer first. And after they get money, they're starting like become like global players, starting like going to other country. Because sometimes we don't have the privilege of like going to global right away. Because again, if you spread too thin, if you only have $1 million to penetrate the market, and you spread it to 100 countries, basically become tasteless, you know. And so I think there's some, it depends again. It depends like on the tools, and if you can come as a local player and become the #1 players there, if it's good enough for the startup, I think it's okay. And also there's another angle that you have to see, like sometimes we can focus on region. A region, for example, in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. I mean, those countries combined is big enough than Europe. You know, so why we need to go to Europe if we can conquer Asia? Is basically that's, you know, my point of view.
Great. So what I hear you saying is it's no doubt important to consider international growth. However, your stage of your company as well as how much funding you have determines really what you should be thinking. And if you have limited funds, then clearly you need to be focusing on having a great product for one specific target market. Is that the general consensus, right? Okay. So are there other scenarios where a company should not consider the international market and just consider focusing locally or on their one specific target market? I'm sorry, could we get any other perspectives from anyone else on the panel?
Yeah, I mean, I think Danny was also making this point, but I definitely, you have to figure out what you're building and if it's even applicable in the international market. Mm-hmm. You know, I referred to it earlier. Tango, you know, the bigger the network, the more valuable it is. You know, it has this network effect, and it is universal in many ways. But you know, something like, they're not startups any longer, but Yelp or OpenTable. I mean, those are very locally oriented. There is a way to expand those businesses, but it takes a lot of brute force and kind of operational resources. So before you do that, you really have to be sure that your core business is working in your original market, and then think hard around whether, you know, you need to go into these other places which are going to present all sorts of new challenges. I mean, another example I think is not necessarily purely mobile, but Groupon. You know, Groupon decided they wanted to be global very quickly, almost right out of the gates, went and acquired all these foreign companies for a lot of capital, in some ways before their core model was even proven. So, you know, that's maybe an extreme example, but even a startup has to kind of think along those terms. When do we even know our core business is working before we decide to expand? And is it even something that makes sense to expand? Or is the market large enough where that's unnecessary?
Okay. So as an investor, are you less likely to invest in a company that is one of these companies that doesn't have much immediate potential for international growth, but can just should be focusing locally? Are you less likely to invest in those type of startups?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't think there's a direct correlation between size of opportunity and, you know, the universality of the product globally. There's plenty of huge businesses that can be built in the US or, you know, in China or wherever. So that's, I mean, it's an important factor, but it doesn't dictate whether it's an interesting investment opportunity. It all comes down to how big is that opportunity wherever it happens to be, and how likely are we and the team able to, you know, execute on that opportunity.
Right on. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. We've been talking indirectly about product. Eric, tell us how what a startup should really consider in order to make sure their product is good for international growth from a product side.
Sure. Let me take actually the example of how Tango managed to get its service to run in China, and you know, by no means was it easy. So today we have a few million users in China, very far from what Weixin has, which works in our space. But at least we figured out how to make the product work, and I think that, you know, first step is make sure that your product does work. The first thing that we figured out, right, is we were seeing just weird numbers over there. We seem to have some numbers on iOS and anemic growth on Android, whereas, you know, that was just completely different from what we saw in all the other countries. And so I think that, the first advice is, first of all, listen and, just analyze what's happening. Find people in these countries, find users maybe in these countries that just can give you some local intelligence. And for us in China, the first step was to understand, well, first of all, there's no Android market present, preloaded on the Android phones. So if that's the only place that you publish in China, you don't stand a chance on Android. So once we figured that out, we started publishing the app in, maybe between 13 and 20 different third-party marketplaces that, by the way, all said that they were the biggest, right? And at least that started the growth. Number two, internationalization, right? Very, very important. Very early adopters actually, will even find that maybe it's cool to be using a product, that with the words in English, but you will wear those off pretty quickly, and you need to break out to, again, to massive, massive scale as early as possible. Again, this is for direct-to-consumer businesses that need to grow quickly. And there, I think that it's very important to localize, and to localize well. You need to basically build it into your process of product development. There are a lot of companies that can provide translations. Once you grow to a big enough scale, you can enroll your users in submitting translations. And if you can make it web-based, you can actually probably even tweak the translations as you operate the product, which is what we do today. Number three, if your product has any performance issues in one of the foreign countries that you're targeting, then that may become an issue. For us in China, there's a big Chinese firewall. And that was very difficult for us to have good quality of service before we had our own servers operating inside of China. So understanding that, going on the grounds, understanding why things are working or not working, and then architecting the service so that you can place your servers close to where your users are. It's very important for performance, reactivity, etc. Today with Amazon, you can actually have data centers in 6, 7, 8 different locations on the planet. It's very cheap. You only need to have the number of servers that you require to operate the service. So actually what's amazing is you can be a 10-people startup and you can be operating a global service with, as if you had 7 or 8 data centers across the world. So all these things, right, come from listening to what's happening, taking action, and not discounting the fact that it doesn't work just like it does at home.
Okay. Great. So Ryusuke, another great product company. Do you have any feedback on how you can maximize the international opportunity from a product perspective?
ちょっと先ほどの話になるんですけども、我々日本から来ているので、日本の例を手に取るとですね、日本はこれまで、ソーシャルゲームの、会社だったりとか、そういったところというのがなかなか海外に出れずに、やはり日本の国内で、稼いでいく、ユーザーを伸ばして、お金にしてビジネスにしていくということを、ずっと、やってきました。で特に、この、シリコンバレーのエリアでも最近はグリーであったりとか DNA が進出してきて、で一生懸命戦っていると思うんですけれども、要するにこれまでっていうのはなかなか我々のように日本人のように英語の壁であったりとかそういうところがあってグローバルに展開するっていうのが非常に難しかったんですけれども、先ほども話に出てたようにAmazon などのクラウドのプラットフォームがグローバルに展開できるそういうプラットフォームが成り立ってきたりだったりとか、あるいはAndroid だったりとか、iPhone の iOS のようなそういうグローバルにプロダクトを流通できるようなディストリビュートできるようなプラットフォームが出てきたことによってローカルに必ずしもやらなくてもいいっていういきなりグローバルでできるっていう風な環境っていうのがここ 2,3 年で整ってきたっていうことを考えるとやはり最初からグローバルを目指してやっていくっていうのが今まで例えば日本でプロダクトを始めますという時にはなかなかできなかったことなのかなというふうに考えてます。
So I have another follow-up question for you specifically. So you currently have, I think, 20 million users in 215 different countries. And actually the US, I believe, is your #1 market. And I'd like to know, was this intentional to target the US #1, but even before your home country of Japan? Or was this just kind of lucky, as I often hear from startups?
FX カメラはですね、2009年の Android が一番最初に出た時に一番最初のカメラアプリケーションとして、ローンチをされた、アプリケーションになっています。そういう意味で言うと一番最初にその Android の端末デバイスが普及したのがアメリカでしたので、結果としてアメリカを目指したというよりは、当時 Android を使っていた国がアメリカだったので、そのまま、アメリカのユーザーさんが多く増えてきて、今でも、アメリカのユーザーが一番多いという状況が、続いているというそういう経緯になっています。
So, as you mentioned, you've stuck with Android for a long time here. Should we be expecting an iOS version soon?
そうですね。来月、iOS バージョンのリリースを、する予定です。
Okay, great news, great news. All right. So let's go back to Eric over here. So you also have an amazing amount of users, I think 67 million users, 212 countries. What do you think Tango's secret to success has been?
Actually, we have close to 72 million users, but the I think that there's a lot of our success has to do with the amazing timing that we had with our launch, and a lot of this was unexpected. When Tango launched its first service, mobile video chat, that's all you could do with the app. It came just 4 weeks after the iPhone 4 came out with FaceTime. And for 4 weeks, Apple had taken out this 4-page newspaper advertisement in all the countries of the world showcasing their new iPhone, and the feature that we're speaking about was video chat. But nobody had iPhone 4s, so you couldn't really use FaceTime, and it was not working on 3G. When we released 4 weeks after, we supported 35 devices, iOS, Android, going back all the way to iPhone 3GS. It worked on Wi-Fi, it worked on 3G, and it was quite simple to use, and it worked. And we managed to ride on that wave of enthusiasm that was global, and I think that that explains a lot of the early success of the company. Afterwards, it was execution, fast releases, supporting all the phones with front-facing cameras as quickly as we could, and then developing the feature set to capture the engagement and the audience that we had. That was very passionate about the product. But really, I mean, I want to emphasize how lucky this timing was, and just really propelled us on the global scene right away. And I think that in a lot of companies that I meet that are going through hypergrowth, there's always some of these unexpected coincidences that really help you to break out in an amazing way. And sometimes they come later in the company, sometimes they come very early. But what you can focus on is your execution. You just focus on the things that you can control, and some good things and some bad things will happen. You just need to capitalize on the good.
Right. So it sounds like if you can somehow magically foresee the future weaknesses of Apple or iOS, then you're in good positioning. But for the most of us, we should just, I guess, prepare ourselves for these things. And you never really know what breaks you might get, is what it sounds like. All right, so Danny, Danny, for many of you might not know, but he's one of the most well-known entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, and I think he knows the local industry better than most. So I constantly am hearing about the hotbed of startups in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia. I used to live in Indonesia, and I know at that time I didn't even have most people didn't have cell phones. Of course, nowadays everyone, of course, has phones. So tell me, what's really happening in Southeast Asia from a startup perspective?
I think it's like I remember like when I lived in here, like in '99, like from '92 to 2003. I was like in the .com rise also. I got lucky like to be a part of it, and I think this is similar period of time when like in the '99 to like 2005. Whereas now Indonesia is actually like start figuring out what kind of tools that we need, what kind of e-commerce that we build, and also like most people are like now like start skipping from the desktop to become like the mobile users and also the tablet, because I see the growth on the tablet purchase and also like the smartphone. Right now is most startup is actually focusing on the game and also the mobile in the startup itself. And Some of my actually one of my company get purchased for $100 million, and there's some of like venture capital is coming in, especially from Japan. Again, Japan market is very stagnant, so they have to get out from their country. So the closest ally is actually like Southeast Asia. And again, there's a lot new startup, but there's a lot of growth opportunity. I mean, imagine this. We have like, right now is 45 million. In 2012, in 2015, supposed to be 75 million alone in Indonesia of the internet web users. When we talk about mobile users, it's about 180 million. I mean, like you compare to like other country, is basically if you're milking it, it's enough. You know, I mean, like one of the site that we have is 40 million users, but it's not global, but it's 40 million users of Indonesia. So yeah, it's a hot is going on, and there's a lot of lacking of like new tools, you know. So it's kind of like Tango, the chat, you know, probably will work well. FX camera is work well in Indonesia also because most Indonesian is narcissists. They like to take picture. I think like some of you Indonesian is agreeing here, and it basically like the tools that like help them to do like more like express themselves. It will help.
And that's actually much what MindTalk, your current startup, does, isn't that right?
Yeah, actually, MindTalk is trying to meet with similar people. We're more focused on interest graph than the social graph.
Okay, so let's shift the focus to Doug for a moment. I hear that 90% of the companies you invest in are successful. This is a ridiculous batting average for VCs, in my opinion, and I think in anyone's opinion. So tell me, what are you doing so differently?
Yeah, so when we say success, we're basically counting either positive exits, you know, M&A type, where the company gets acquired, or companies that are continuing to grow and raise money at higher and higher valuations. So I think in some ways our hit rate is too high. You know, it's like we probably should be cutting the cord even earlier in some cases, but I don't know, kind of our personality is such that we just keep working really closely with the entrepreneurs and cranking away and pivoting until we hit something. And we only do a handful of companies at a time, so we're very focused on those companies until we reach some level of success. That's basically how we do it. I don't know that it'll stay at 90%, but you know, it's worked well so far. Another point I wanted to just raise on this, because I think we forget about it sometimes, on this globalization question, how to expand internationally. There's also a bunch of, and I know there's some here in the exhibit hall, there's platform companies, B2B to C companies, or B2B companies. And we don't do those as often, but we do have several in the mobile ecosystem. And what I found is those actually tend to expand internationally even almost more seamlessly than the consumer ones. I think because the developer community globally is almost like one, it's almost like one market. There's I guess a lot of developers speak English, or at least read English. And they're on the same forums, and they're talking to each other, and things spread virally across that global developer community if they work well. And you think, we have, as I mentioned, Playhaven, which is doing well, but you think of companies like Flurry or Tapjoy, or there's all sorts of companies that serve mobile developers, and they're very well known everywhere, and they're well known before they decide to go global. Now, the wise companies, when they see that happening, they then set up operations in other countries and quickly translate and localize their products. But again, it doesn't usually start that way, and it's been amazing to see kind of global growth happen on these platforms, even when the founders aren't thinking about it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to take questions from Twitter, but I'm looking right now and I don't see any questions. So if you have any questions, just tweet it, hashtag the GMIC, and I'll get to it in just a moment. Until that happens, so we'll move on with another question. So what startup from anywhere in the world, what startup do you feel like has done a good job of growing globally and hitting this massive growth that we've been discussing. Could we start over here with Danny? Do you have any perspectives on that?
Yeah, actually, I just visited Japan like a week ago, and I got lucky to meet with Line president director Akira. I think it's like Line is offering a new way of like communicating, and there's very simple. It's weird because like most Japanese companies tend to be complicate things. And suddenly Line appearing like from Naver is appearing like a chat system that like actually making simple. I mean, instead of like you create a type of emoticon and like you just press an emoticon and it's pop. And they've been working well in Indonesia and I think in Singapore and everywhere. I think Line is a good example for a small company. They grow like within 12 months is 100 million users.
And you mentioned earlier that they actually have significant users in the U.S. or at least growing quickly here in the U.S. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Eric, what do you think?
Well, I'd like to speak.
Other than Tango, of course.
I was not going to speak about Tango. For me, Instagram is a great example. And, you know, I'd like to go back actually to the Instagram product for a little bit. You know, almost no text, just pictures. That's something very international. Everybody enjoys seeing nice pictures, being able to, you know, collect likes on the pictures that they post, making things beautiful, etc. Just a very, very visual product that is extremely seamless with almost no text. And, you know, kind of by design, it was architected for that. And it's #1 in so many countries. So I think, you know, really no question that really captures a worldwide audience.
Okay, right on. Okay, next.
Can I nominate Tango? No. Yeah, they've done a great job. I mean, one very obvious example, I think, is Rovio with Angry Birds. I don't know how intentional this was, but somehow I think they managed to come up with these very, I mean, obviously simple but addictive games, but also just the characters and the art they use somehow seem to be international. You know, everywhere I go, walking around, you know, Beijing or Tokyo or Paris or the Valley here, you know, you see kids with the T-shirts on and the plush toys in the stores. Oftentimes, I'm sure, not properly licensed in some of these places. But, you know, somehow they just managed to. Gaming is, I think, potentially easier to do that, but within gaming, I think they're kind of at the pinnacle for coming up with something that just crosses borders seamlessly.
Mm-hmm. Right on, right on. It does seem like, you know, I'm typically based in China for the past 5 years, and it seems like the Western companies or apps that are extremely successful are typically entertainments. Of course, Talking Tomcat, Angry Birds, Cut the Rope are just massive in China. So in my perspective, I've yet to see a non-entertainment company really attain that level of growth. I think we'll see that soon, though. Of course, I think Evernote is doing a great job there too. So Ryusuke, what do you think is a startup that's done a great job of growing globally?
我々はですね、3つぐらいポイントがあるかなと考えてまして、1つ目はその世界中の誰もが欲しがるようなそういうものをまず作るっていうところが重要かなと思ってます。だから先ほども話に出てた通り、文字であったりとかテキストだったりとかそういうものっていうのが必要ないぐらいシンプルなインターフェース。例えばインスタグラムもそうですし。いろんなプロダクトそうだと思うんですけれども、もうボタンを押せば写真が撮れるとか、ここを押せばこうなるっていうのがすぐに分かる非常にシンプルなインターフェースで誰もが使えるっていうのが大事かなと思ってます。それからあとはもう一つ間口を広げるっていう意味で、特にモバイルのアプリに関して言いますと、Android はものすごい数のデバイス、端末の種類があるので、どんな端末でもきちんと動くようにする。それによって例えば発展途上国の端末なんかはすごくスペックが低くてなかなか正しく動かないということが結構多くあるんですけれども、そういったものっていうのも全て対応していくことで多くの人たちが望んで、かつ多くの人たちっていうのが言語に関わらず使っていけるようなシンプルなものを作っていくっていうのが今後のそのモバイルのスタートアップでグローバルにやっていく中で重要なポイントかなというふうに考えてます。
Right on. I think that's great feedback, especially alluding back to our earlier product question of saying, simple UIs that are not heavy on words, right, is a product that can grow globally much easier. Okay, so we've got some great questions from the audience. I really appreciate those. Let's start with the first one that came in from Rupa0, R-U-P-A-Z-E-R-O, who has had great tweets throughout the conference, so thanks to whoever you are. How do you deal with diverse monetization solutions in different territories? So basically, how do you make sure your monetization strategy can translate to other countries? Eric?
So our example, we don't deal with it. We monetize through the App Store. The countries that support billing in the App Store, they can buy the content that we sell. The others actually don't have access to that portion of the app. That's the easy way. I know that in China, everybody uses Alipay. And I think that if there was a second monetization option that we would choose to build in, that would probably be the second one.
Okay, great. So simplify, focus on the App Store. All right. Any other perspectives? All right, well, let's move on to the next question. The question was specifically for Doug. Is there a particular industry within mobile you focus on? So is there somewhere you focus within mobile?
Anywhere where a big company can be built. I mean, we identified mobile as a target because we just felt like, and we did this 2 years ago, but we felt like essentially the next 5 years were going to be incredibly disruptive. And anytime there's disruption and new habits are being formed, that's when new brands and big new businesses are built. That's really why we chose it. Within mobile, no, we don't have a particular domain. I mean, we're doing e-commerce companies, payment companies, gaming, ad tech platforms. So all sorts of things. It's just wherever there's disruption, and we think we and the founders have some key to taking advantage of that disruption.
Right on, great. And that tweet was from 21EDU. All right, so we have just enough time for one last question from the panelists. For many people at the conference, like we've mentioned, we have over 42 countries represented here today. So for many people at the conference, the US is the international market. And so I'd like to end off with some specific advice for those international entrepreneurs that are here that are thinking about how they can tackle the U.S. specifically. So for some of you, you have dealt with that question yourselves, and for some of you, you're based here in the U.S. So that's the last question, is some advice for international entrepreneurs targeting the U.S. Could we start at the end with Danny?
I think it's like when we talk about like to penetrate the international market, the first thing that we need to know is like where is our power users. For me, it's like very simple. If you don't have a power user, don't go there. It will waste your time. And second thing, you need to like partner with like local partner to understand, and also like to doing like a partnership like with all like kind of like telco, the phone manufacturers, trying to get pre-install and like trying to get like basically like in your favors. And the third thing is basically like collaborations with like many startups. At least like your stuff be like get adopted.
Right on. Collaboration, partnerships, right? Okay.
Actually, I like what you said, because I think that the US is such a huge market. It's a great market. It's a huge, people willing to pay. And I think everybody wants to come here. At the same time, it's very competitive. So you need to start with some organic growth. And if you don't have any organic growth, don't come here. But if you do, then I think that some press helps, and the US press is different from any other. There's some marketing channels that are particularly well tailored here in terms of user acquisition. I'm thinking in particular on the game market. If you need to pay your way up the App Store, certain solutions work here and only work here. I'm thinking of Tapjoy, Flurry, etc. But so start with initial traction and then go and find your right marketing channels.
Great. Right marketing channels, and one of those would be being a part of the Global Mobile Internet Conference, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, don't be too enticed by the U.S. market for all the reasons I just said. It's attractive, but it's tough. And if you're coming from somewhere like, just throw some things out, Brazil or India or Indonesia or China, those are huge markets with tons of, a tremendous amount of disruption taking place. and huge growth in terms of smartphone and tablet adoption. Those look really attractive to me, so if I were a developer in one of those places, I'd be looking to what I could do there first before I said, oh, I'm just going to pack up and head off to Silicon Valley.
Exactly, great feedback. It's advice that I often give to Chinese companies as well, as the U.S. is a little too difficult to come right away and to grow a little slower across the world. So, last words.
そうですね、今まさに言ってた通りだと思うんですけれども、例えば我々は日本の会社で東京をベースに活動しているんですけれども、じゃあアメリカで会社を作ってこっちを拠点に活動しましょうといった場合には結構いろんなハードルもあったりします。例えば本当に基本的なことなのかもしれないんですけれども、ビザの問題をどうしようかとか、そういうさまざまなバックオフィス的なその手続きであったりとか、そういうことに非常にいきなりアメリカでやろうというふうに入っていくとコストとあと時間というものがかかってくると思います。なので今本当にそのグローバルにプロダクトを展開するっていうところに関してのコストが非常に下がってきているので、いきなりそのアメリカでやるぞという時に拠点をこっちに持ってきてやるっていうのも、もちろんそれは非常にいいチョイスだとは思うんですけれども、一方でその自分たちの活動しやすい場所で拠点を置いて、そこからアメリカいろんなその国にユーザーを獲得してプロダクトを展開していくっていう風なやり方っていうのもこれからはですねやっていけるのではないかなというふうに思います。
Okay, so it sounds like we're in somewhat agreement here at the end for your international entrepreneurs is don't automatically assume that you should target the U.S. You need to make sure you're prepared for that as the competition is high. So that's the final words for our conference. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. I really enjoyed the panel, and I think we all learned a lot. So thanks a lot. Please give them a hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barrett, and the rest of the panel.